Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. And in this particular one, we are going to be looking at the Helius SDK, specifically the DAS API, which is used to fetch crucial information from the Solana blockchain. And the Helius SDK is amazing and easy to use, and it helps you query blockchain information and execute transactions on the actual blockchain. And what we're going to do in this video is just use the DAS API, which allows you to read transactions from the Solana blockchain and extremely fast. And other than what we are actually covering in this video, Helius actually offers a lot of different products as well. For example, their flagship product is actually their RPCs, which are extremely fast and reliable. And if you are building a decentralized application, then I highly recommend that you check them out. They have the best-in-class RPCs for Solana blockchain, and you require RPCs to fetch balances for tokens and performing different operations or read operations, or when you are building a wallet and you need to fetch, for example, wallet chain specific information from a blockchain, then you require solid RPCs, and Helius is exactly useful for that specific case. But it also offers other products, for example, the Helius SDK. Now, the Helius SDK allows you to interact with the Solana blockchain using an API, and it makes it extremely easy to use and very overly simplifies your development process. And that's exactly what we are going to be covering in this video, although specifically we are going to be covering the DAS API. Now, let's go ahead and actually see what DAS API is. As you can notice on the second tab, I have opened up Helius documentation, and this documentation has information about all of the stuff related to Helius, but more specifically, we are talking about the Digital Asset Standard API. Now, DAS is basically a specification that is quite easy to use and work with, because when you are working with APIs, especially when it comes to blockchain, and this is a relatively new industry, that's why you need a very specific API standard, which allows developers to more easily integrate your APIs. So basically, Digital Asset Standard API is just a specification that allows you to understand and work with APIs a lot more smoothly, and it's much easier to work with things when there is a fixed way. And what we're going to do in this video is just look at some of DAS API methods. In this video, we're just going to be covering how you can fetch information from the Solana blockchain using API methods, and it's actually very straightforward because the documentation is very good, and it allows you to integrate the Helius API, the Helius SDK extremely easily. And in this video, we're going to use Nextjs, which is an amazing framework and allows you to develop and deploy applications pretty quickly. And we're going to use TypeScript as the programming language, just for the sake of showing you how you can use Helius SDK in your own Web3 project. Now, as you can see that you can learn more about the DAS API and the Helius SDK on the documentation, and don't worry about the link because I'm going to leave it down below. As you can see, I'm on this particular URL, and over here it basically says everything you need to know about the DAS API and about the DAS methods. They get information, they query some data from the blockchain. It could be data about tokens or NFTs or even compressed NFTs. And as you can see, if you scroll further below, you can have a look at all the methods that are available using Helius. It's a very comprehensive list, and the very first one is obviously getAsset. Now let's just look at the getAsset method. We're not going to go too deep into it. I just want to show you guys how it's going to look like. Now, as you can see, there's a very small and precise description. It says get an asset by its ID, which means that all you need to do is pass the ID of the asset. Now, that asset can be a token, an NFT, or it could also be a compressed NFT. And if you're wondering where you can get this ID from, then I highly suggest you look at the Block Explorer for Solana, and I have it opened as well in another tab. It's explorer.solana.com, and I'm going to include it in the description below, so don't worry about not being able to find it, but it's explorer.solana.com, and over here you can look at all the transactions that are taking place on this blockchain, and you can get information, meta information about each transaction, whether it's a contract interaction, or if it's just like, creating a contract, or if it's transferring assets, stuff like that. Anything you can imagine, you can find it on the Solana Explorer. Great, so let's go back to the documentation. I think I've given you a very general idea about what the DAS API does and what we are going to do today. So let's go ahead and start building our very small Nextjs application to just see how we can work with the Helius SDK. Okay, great. So as you can see that I have opened up my VS Code and I'm inside of a folder called as example-Helius, and let's go ahead and open the terminal. Now what I'm going to do is create a new Nextjs application, and I'm going to type in something like create next app and then space. Then I'm going to write a name of the application. You can give it any name you want, and in this case I'm going to write something. I'm not exactly great at giving names, but we can go with Sol app. Oops, I think we need to add npx at the beginning in order for it to work. Yeah, now it's loading and it should create our application, and this app is called Sol app. Okay, it's asking us okay to proceed. We're going to type yes and hit enter. Would you like to use TypeScript? Yeah, sure, let's use TypeScript. I'm going to say no to ESLint because it's a little bit annoying. Let's say yes to Tailwind. src directory, I'm going to say no. Would you like to use the app router? Sure, let's go ahead. No. Great, so it has created a new project folder. As you can see, it's called Sol app. It's exactly the name that we gave us in the command before, and it's loading because it's setting up our Nextjs project. Okay, great, so it's now done installing everything, and we can safely go ahead and cd into our project, which is Sol app. So let's write cd space Sol app, and that should be it. We can build the application because and yeah, once it's done building, we can also run it. And now let's run the application. npm run dev. Great, so as you can see that our application is working on localhost 3000, which is great, exactly as we wanted. Now let's go ahead and start setting up our project with Helius SDK, and I'm just going to go ahead and follow the documentation and do as it says on how we can set up the Helius SDK. And I think that it should be right over here as to how we can set it up. Yeah, here it is. So for each package manager, you have a different command for installing the Helius SDK. In my case, I'm using npm, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this command right over here and paste it on my terminal. I'm going to open a new one and make it a bash terminal. But wait, I think we need to cd first into our project, which is Sol app. Great. Now let's go ahead and paste this command, npm install Helius-SDK, which is going to install the Helius SDK into our project. Let's hit enter and then wait for it to finish installing. Great, so as you can see that it's now done installing, and another step that we need to complete at this point is to get the API keys from the Helius website. And you might be, if you're new to Web3 development, then yeah, this might be something new for you. But if you have been using other SDKs like Alchemy or ThirdWeb to build decentralized applications, then it's the next step after installing the SDK. It's to create an account and get the API key so that you can start building with the SDK. So in order to get the API keys, we're just going to go back to the Helius website, and I'm going to go ahead and create an account, and let's click start building. As you can see, it pops up as an onboarding page, and you can go ahead and fill in your information. And let's skip ahead to the part where I am done signing up so that we can get the API key next. Great, so as you can see that we have signed up, and it has taken us to the dashboard. There's a few, we can ignore this notification over here. Great, so as you can see, it says that we are on the current free plan, which obviously implies that there's also paid tiers, and you can always explore that if you are building a scalable application. But in our case, a free plan should be sufficient, as I just want to demonstrate to you how you can use the Helius SDK in your projects. Now, if you scroll below, you can look at all the different services that they offer. RPC, they also offer webhooks, which by the way are awesome. Basically, the Helius webhooks allow you to listen for certain events happening on the Solana blockchain. So for example, if there's a new listing, or if there's a swap that's going on the Solana blockchain, then you can listen to those events, and you can immediately you will immediately get a response on a particular endpoint, and then you can build more cool stuff on top of that. So whenever you can basically know whenever someone has completed a certain action on the Solana blockchain, for example, if they have swapped their tokens, then you'll get to know immediately using the webhooks, which are pretty awesome because you can actually build a lot of cool stuff using the webhooks. Anyway, moving on, we do have enriched APIs, which is what we're going to be using in this video. We're going to be using the DAS API, and let's go ahead and go to this API key section in order to get our API key. As you can see, we already have the one API key generated over here because I may have generated it in the past, but in case you don't have it yet, you can always click on this button that says generate new key, and once you click on that, it is automatically going to generate it for you. You can also edit the API key by changing the key name, etc., but we don't care. We just want to see how we can generate the API key. But now once we have done that, we can go ahead and use this API key inside of our project. So the very next thing is, actually let's go back to our documentation to see what we need to do next. We have completed this step which says installation. Now let's go to the section called quick start, and I'm going to leave the link to this documentation, specifically this page down below, so that you can follow it from the beginning, from the get-go. And let's go ahead and see how we can get started. So yeah, as you can see in the code example, it says import Helius from Helius SDK, and then on this very first line you need to create a new instance using new Helius, and then passing in your API key that we just generated, and then you can use the value returned by this new object to perform different actions, like get different information. Like the DAS API that we talked about, we can use the DAS API methods with this Helius object. As you can see, they have done the same. They have used the DAS API method called getAssetsByOwner, and the way to call it is to write helius.rpc.getAssetsByOwner. You pass in the owner address, and then you just type in how many pages you want, and it's going to fetch you all the items. And this is how you display the items in your application. You write here response.items. Okay, so that's pretty much very straightforward, and it can be done in just 2 or 3 lines of code, as you have just seen. So let's go ahead and start implementing all of this inside of our Nextjs project. Let's go back to VS Code and let's open our application. and our page.tsx file. And we obviously have a bunch of boilerplate code written over here, and we can go ahead and completely remove all this. Great. So let's get started by importing the Helius SDK. We're gonna write import Helius, and it comes in the suggestions automatically, Helius from Helius SDK. And once that is done, we need to initialize a new instance of Helius by creating a new constant and writing equals new Helius. And now we need to pass in the API key as a string to this object. Now it's going to be the same API key that we generated from the Helius dashboard after creating an account. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it right over here. Great. So now we have just created a new Helius object, and that's pretty much it for initializing a new Helius object. Now we can go ahead and start using a bunch of different API methods. And in this video, we're obviously only covering DAS API methods. So let's go ahead and start implementing that. Okay, so the next step is to actually call this method to call the DAS API method, which basically will fetch us information about the asset. And if you go back to the documentation, you're going to find that if you scroll further below, then the way to actually execute any DAS API method using the Helius SDK is to initialize a Helius object, which we already have done. And the second step is to write helius.rpc and then followed by the name of the method, which in our case is getAsset. And we're getting this asset by its ID, and it helps to know what kind of values we can pass to this particular method. And you can always find that inside of the documentation. I'm right here in this URL where there's a very in-depth and amazing information given about how you can use the getAsset method. And over here you can look at different values that can be passed. So if I scroll a little, I can find that there's a parameters object that can be passed to the method, and these parameters consist of the ID of the asset that you actually want to fetch information for, and this is pretty much the only mandatory value that needs to be passed to this method. And the other value that is optional is called the options object, and this options object contains a bunch of different options that you can pass to this method. And there are a total of 4 options that we can pass, and it probably helps to know what the default values of these options are. And the very first option is the show unverified collections, and you can read the description about what it means. Like here it says that it displays information about which unverified collection the asset belongs to. In case that collection is unverified, then setting this value to a true will mean that the result that we get from the method will actually contain information about the collection that the asset belongs to, even if the collection is unverified. And it's up to you. You can set it to true or false depending on your use case or what your decentralized application is doing. And the second option is show collection metadata, which means to show metadata for the collection that the asset belongs to. You can set it to, if you set it to true, you will obviously get more extra information being passed as a response. And the third is to show fungible, if there are any fungible tokens held by the owner of this asset. And the fourth is show inscription, which is show inscription details of any asset that are inscribed on the chain. So these are the values. And for this method, you can also look at what the default value of these options are. If you scroll further below, you can see that the only mandatory one is obviously as a set ID, which is to be passed as a string. And the second is the options object. And for the first 2 values, the default is always true, and the last 2 values, default is false. Now let's go back to our code and let's start implementing this simple fetch request from the blockchain by implementing this simple method getAsset. So what we're going to do is I'm going to write here So notice that I have declared this function as asynchronous, and that's because we're kind of making a call or an API request internally through the RPC or endpoint of Helius, and this means that the data could take a little bit of time to return the value, in which case you should be using an asynchronous function or call it and kind of await the value. So let's write here const asset equals you can write here await, and we'll use the Helius object to call this method. Let's write helius.rpc.getAsset. As you can see, it gets recommended down below, and you need to pass an object to this method. So let's write here ID, and we can get an example asset ID inside of the Helius documentation. So if you go back to the page where we were, and if you scroll further below, we can find a couple of examples being given here. And as you can see, they're using the URL endpoint method. You can also use this along with the fetch API, but since I just want to show you guys how you can work with the Helius API, I'm using the Helius SDK instead. So as you can see, in this case, they have passed this particular ID, and it says that this endpoint is basically giving you information about an asset that belongs to MATLAB collection, which is pretty cool. So I can just copy this ID and paste it right over here. Sorry, it needs to be enclosed inside of a string, just like that. And you can also pass in some options if you like. For example, let's display options. And let's get some information about the collection itself. In this case, which is MATLAB's collection, let's show the collection metadata. Let's set this value as true, and that's about it. I mean, you can always customize it more. You can always find more ways to display more metadata by passing in other values. And okay, so let's go ahead and actually try console.logging the value that we have just received from this call. And actually, I noticed that the server is not running, so let's go ahead and start the server as well. And let's write over here console.log asset, which is basically the asset that we get by referencing it using this ID. If you already have an asset that's deployed on the Solana blockchain, then that's great. You can go ahead and copy that ID from the Solana Explorer and paste it here. But I just want to demonstrate to you guys how you can work with this endpoint to get information, and that's pretty much it. And remember that in Nextjs, by default, your components are server files or server functions by default, which means that by default, if you do console.log, the value that gets logged will appear on the terminal instead of appearing on the browser's console, DevTools console. So for that reason, we need to look out for the value inside of the terminal. So let's actually go ahead and open the server. As you can see that it's now loading. But since we are logging it out over here, it should appear on the console, and there we go. As you can see that a very large object has appeared with a lot of information here. As you can see, the very first value is the interface, which is the programmable NFT, and this is the ID that we used to fetch this asset. And you can look at the content of this asset, which basically gives you information about the collection. And as you can see, inside of metadata, we are able to see information like attributes and description. This is the description, and the name of the collection is MATLABs, and the item is, or the asset is 8420, and the symbol of this asset is MAD. The description is, as you know. Go further below, we can also get more information. For example, the grouping object, it gives you information about all of the collections that this particular asset belongs to. But this is an array, and it only consists of one single object, which means that it only belongs to one collection, which is this collection. This is the group value, And since we are displaying all this value, we haven't parsed this value properly, and I think we should probably be parsing this value in a much more neat way before displaying it. But I just wanted to show you and give you an idea about how you can fetch all this information, and we now have all of this information in our hands, and we can use this information to display all the data in a very neat way on the user interface. And obviously you can filter the value that you are getting from this method by passing in more options. As we saw, we could pass an on option to get metadata about the collection, which we do have, which we have information about the collection's metadata, which is the MATLAD's collection. And we can look at the ownership as well. The ownership object tells you about the owner. This is the owner address, and ownership model is single, which means only a single address can own it, and it's a frozen asset. And you can also look at the supply as well. And here's this token information. Now let's move on to other methods as well. But before we do, I want to show you an amazing resource offered by Helius right on their GitHub page. And if you go to this particular page, you can see that this is what we were working on. We used exactly this value in our example that we just did in order to get the all the values, fetch all the values from the Solana blockchain. And this, I'm going to leave this URL down below where you can find all of the methods and examples on how you can use it. And this is a bit more straightforward if you don't want to navigate through the entire documentation of Helius. And this offers, as you can see, if you scroll above, you can look at all the DAS API methods right below it. These are all the methods that you have available, and you also have other methods as well, which we're going to look at next. So for example, this is the one that we just looked at, which is the getAsset by its ID. Great. And if we scroll further down below, we can see there's a second method that says getAssetBatch. Now what this does is that it works pretty much similar to how getAsset is, because it also fetches the assets from Solana blockchain. The only difference is that it can get multiple assets by passing multiple IDs to the particular method. Now if you remember, we just passed a single ID right over here, which is a string, but using getBatchAsset, you can get multiple assets using a single method call. So all we need to do is really change getAsset to getBatchAsset, which is getAssetBatch. And instead of passing a string, you can pass an array of string, which is an array of IDs. And obviously you need to make sure that the IDs that you're passing are valid, otherwise you are not going to be able to fetch the right information. And after copying that, I've just pasted it right over here. And yeah, the value, the property is not called ID, it's called IDs with an S in the end. Great. So now it doesn't show any error anymore, which means that we can go ahead and call this API. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear the console and start the server once again, so that we can have a look at the values that are returned by this particular method. I may need to refresh this page in order to fetch the values through the method. As you can see, it's now loading, and there we go. We have all of the values for each ID. As you can see that it starts with a bracket, with an open bracket, which means that it's returning an array of objects, and each object contains information about the different asset in the order that you passed it to the method. So as you can see, the very first object or the very first asset is this, and it contains information about the asset. This is the very first value, or the very first asset information that's returned right over here until this point. And right after the comma, as you can see, which is this, we have the asset value for the very second object that we provided an ID for. And you can always use the ID value, which is given over here, to match which asset it actually belongs to, which is always going to be a unique ID. And there's all this information, and once again, as I said earlier, you can filter out the information, the kind of data that's displayed or returned by modifying this object, which is called display options. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next method, which is called this getSignaturesForAsset. Now every single transaction requires you to sign it, which is called the signature, and each asset is assigned to a particular signature, and it's only related to a compressed asset. So when you call this endpoint, you're only going to get compressed assets that have a signature attached to it. And the way to call this endpoint is very simple and straightforward, just as we had in the case of getAsset method. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this value, right? Copy this code and paste it right over here. And just want to show you how it's going to look like. And we're going to change the response constant to asset and save it again. And boom, as you can see that it has fetched the signature for this compressed asset, and it contains a value, a property called items, that is an array of object. And as you can see that it gives you the signature of that particular asset, which is pretty cool. And you can specify any number of pages you want to divide it into if you are expecting a lot of assets to be returned by this call. And let's move on to the next method, which is called searchAssets. Now in a lot of cases you may not know the asset ID, as happens a lot of cases, as it's normal that you may forget the asset ID completely, or you may not have access to your asset ID, and you may only, for example, know your wallet addresses. So in this case, this particular method is extremely useful, and what it does is that it allows you to search for assets by specifying a couple of parameters in the which are being passed, and by passing it to the searchAssets method. And as you can see in this example, we have passed an owner address, which is nothing but the wallet address whom the asset belongs to, and we have set compressed as true, and again the page is 1. So this means that it will fetch all the assets that belong to this owner, which are also compressed. And it's a very simple method once again, but it's very extremely useful in a lot of cases where you may want to fetch all the assets owned by your user after they have signed in. You may want to display them on a very nice UI to show them what their assets are, and especially if you're building something like an NFT marketplace where users can load up their NFTs and sell their NFTs in your application. It's extremely useful in that particular case. So let's replace this code with this one. I'm going to write asset, and the owner address is going to remain the same because I don't have a wallet that has many assets on the Solana chain, which is why we're just going to go with a wallet that's provided in the example. And let's save the file and see if it's able to fetch any kind of data for us. So it's loading now, it's still fetching, and it's going through all the assets, and it's trying to filter out all the assets that are compressed to make sure that it returns a valid value. And boom, as you can see that we have a result, and it's a very long list of assets that have been returned using our method, and all of these assets belong to the owner that we specified at this particular method, and all of these assets are also compressed. Now you might be wondering, like, what are the different options that we can pass to this particular endpoint? For example, what are the different ways in which I can filter these assets that are returned? And the simple way to see that is to just inspect this particular object. If you're on Windows, then you can hold Control and you can right click, which will take you to the source code. And over here, as you can see that this searchAssets method is defined, you can hold Control and right click on searchAssetRequest, which should take you to this particular place in this file, and you can see all the different values that can be passed to this request, to this method. And the very first one is page, which we have already used. The second is limit, which is basically you can define how many maximum values you want to return, and if the number of assets returned is more than that, then it will simply omit those values. You can also filter by the creator address, which is the person who is the creator of that particular asset, and you can pass in the value over here, and it's going to filter out whatever the value is returned by this particular address. This is the owner address that we already did. This is the person who owns this asset, and you can also filter by grouping, by defining which collection that asset belongs to. Like for example, you just want to get assets that are owned by, for example, specifying a specific owner address and the assets that belong to, for example, the MATLABs group, and whether that asset is burned or not. And you can also sort by. Now this one is very interesting. You can click on this, and these are all the options. You can sort by the created or updated or recent action. Once you have defined, so you can either sort by ascending or descending order, and you need to specify this direction in this value, and based on which parameter you want to sort these values, you need to pass to this particular value, which is called sort by. And it needs and you have three options here. You can either display all the assets based on ascending order based on the ascending order of the date they were created on, or the date they were updated on, like the latest updated assets, and the recent action, which means that the very recent asset that had a smart contract interaction with anyone. So these are some very cool ways that you can interact with the or you can filter out the results. And there's also you can also specify a supply. So maybe you are searching for assets that are limited in supply, so you can set the supply as 1. So this way you're only going to get assets that have a supply of 1. And there's this interface. Now interface can vary based on different type of assets. There's a royalty amount, and whether the asset is compressible or not, and whether it's compressed or not, and all the token type, and so on and so forth. So these are very cool ways of fetching the methods. I'm not going to cover them just now. I just wanted to let you guys give you guys an overview of what's possible with this particular method. Now let's go ahead and move on to the very next method, which is called getAssetProof. Now in some cases you might want to fetch the Merkle proof for a compressed asset by its ID. Now it's not very common to fetch this, but in some cases you might want to, and in that case this is extremely useful. The way to do it is actually very simple. All you need to do is initialize a response object, and you need to use the getAssetProof method, and all you need to do is really just pass the ID of the asset that you want to fetch Merkle proof of, and it's going to give you the Merkle proof. If it's a compressed asset, then it will return a valid value. So yeah, make sure that you are passing an asset ID of an asset that is compressed. So let's actually go ahead and implement this. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this ID value, and in fact I might need to rewrite this. So let's write here what was it called? It's called getAssetProof, and you need to pass in the ID which we just copied. So let's paste it over here. That's amazing, and that should be it. I'm going to restart the server and clear the terminal so that we can see the output much more clearly. Great, it has now fetched the Merkle proof of the asset. And obviously, since we are just using the examples provided by Helius, there's going to be a valid response because these assets have a Merkle proof on the chain. But in some cases, your assets might not be compressed. In that case, you will not receive a valid response. Now, as you can see, this object contains the root, which is the Merkle root, and this is the Merkle proof of the asset that's been compressed, and it consists of a list of string and this is the node index as well as the Merkle tree's leaf this asset is on, and the tree ID, the Merkle tree ID as well, which is useful information for you if you're ever planning to implement some advanced features on your decentralized application. And this is pretty much the structure of the response that we get from getAssetProof. Now let's go ahead and move on to the very next method, which is called getAssetsByOwner. Now the thing, we did cover something like similar to this before. If we scroll above, oh, actually it looks like now you can pretty much implement this using the searchAssets method as well. But here's another method anyway that allows you to get assets by the owner. So this is going to fetch all the assets that are owned by the owner. If you are fetching assets of a user or of a wallet on Solana, then this is a recommended method to go for and not the searchAssets method. And let's go ahead and implement this really quickly. Again, I'm going to copy this particular owner address, and we are going to implement this in our own little case right over here. And we're going to change the method, which is getAssetsByOwner. As you can see that there are various different options similar to this. There's getAssetsByOwner, there's getAssetsByGroup, there's getAssetsByCreator, or by authority. And you can use either of these options to accomplish your goals, and it just depends on which use case you want to use this method for. And in this case, I just want to display some kind of data to show you that it works. That's why I'm just going to use the getAssetsByOwner method, and over here I'm going to specify this as owner address. Yeah, we have pasted the owner address. We also need to define the page. This is going to be 1, since we don't expect a lot of assets to be brought here, and we are not exactly implementing pagination for our use case. And boom, as you can see that all our assets have been fetched. Now there are so many assets that we cannot display them on this command line interface, but we do see that a lot of assets have been fetched. You can look at the asset information of each of the assets that are being fetched. For example, the ID of the asset and a bunch of other stuff that need to be parsed properly, but you get the idea of how you can fetch all the assets. So fetch assets in a similar way for different authority or a different creator, which is also very useful in some cases. But anyway, let's move on to the next method. Since we have already covered some of these use cases, for example, we know what these methods do. Let's move on to a particularly more unique method, which is the getTokenAccounts. Now, this particular one gives us information about all the accounts for a specific mint or a specific owner. And this is a little bit more unique because we are not just fetching assets, we are fetching token accounts. And we can fetch that for a specific mint, or we can fetch that for a specific owner. It's all again based on the use case that you need this method for. And let's go ahead and actually implement this really quickly inside of our application. I'm going to go ahead and copy this example and paste it right over here and change this value to asset. And what this should do is this should get me all the token accounts, and the limit is set to 100, which means that if it exceeds that amount, that number, then we simply don't want to fetch any more assets. Just give me the top 100 assets, and in the options we have specified that just make sure that those accounts if they have 0 balance, then don't show me those accounts. And this is the owner that we have specified, so we are filtering by owner, get all the token accounts that are associated to this particular owner. And that's pretty much it. Let's just go ahead and run this query by saving it, and this should fetch us all the data using this method. And indeed it has. As you can see, this is a rather small one, and what it does is that it has fetched a token account. As you can see, there are multiple token accounts associated with this particular owner address. It has 2 in total, and this is the token account address for each of them. and the amount that is held. If any of these token accounts, it's also possible that this owner had more token accounts than just these two, but since we specified that there should be if there's zero balance on that account, we just don't want to display that token account as part of the response. That way, because of that reason, we get a more filtered response that consists of accounts that has a non-zero balance. So this is pretty cool, and you are able to get token accounts associated with a token owner, and you can also get information regarding a specific mint. So we could always change this owner value to something like mint, and you can see if you can specify a particular mint value and see all the token accounts that that are associated to this particular mint. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and move on to the next method, which is the last method that is part of the DAS API, and it is the getNftEditions method. And what it does is that for a specific master NFT, it gets all the information about the edition NFTs. What this means is that there can be a master NFT, and there can be other NFTs that are derived from the master. And this helps us fetch all the edition NFTs for a specific master NFT, and we need to pass that particular mint or NFT value when we are calling this particular method. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. We're going to copy this, and we're going to have it pasted inside of our application. And what it does is that for a particular mint, it gets all the NFT editions, because there can be multiple NFTs that are derived from a master NFT. We have again defined the page as 1 because we don't want to implement pagination or any of that, and we have set the limit as 2 because we only need a maximum of 2 NFTs being returned. So let's save this and go back to our terminal to see if anything is being fetched, and there we go. We do have something returned over here. As you can see, there is an editions array which has fetched all the NFT editions that are derived from that particular master NFT, and you can look at the mint value, the edition address, as well as the number of edition. Since we set the limit value as 2, we are only able to see 2 NFT edition values. But if there are more NFTs and the limit value is not 2, then you can obviously see more values. So limit actually defines how many number of values you want to see or you want to show to the user. So let's look at some of these values. The very first value that you can see here, it says total as 2, which means that there are only a total of 2 editions of NFTs being displayed over here, which is because we have a limit set as 2. But if we didn't have the limit as 2, then we will be able to see all of the NFTs, NFT editions that are derived from the master edition displayed as part of the editions array. But that's not the case because we have defined a limit, and the page is obviously 1 because that's the value that we gave while calling this particular method. This is the master edition address, which is the master NFT from which the edition NFTs are derived from. And the next value is the supply value, which basically is referring to the total number of edition NFTs that are available. So if we did not pass a limit of 2, then it will actually display all the 61 edition NFTs as part of the editions array. And the max supply is 69, but that is referring to all the to the supply that's defined inside of the master NFT or in the master edition. There can only be 69, a total of 69 edition NFTs that can be part of this master NFT. And that's pretty much it for the DAS API. In this video, we looked at a couple of endpoints, and a lot of them are quite similar, so we did skip over a couple, but this was just to give you an idea on how you can fetch all the super cool information from the Solana blockchain using the Helius SDK, the DAS API, which helps you to build applications really quickly. And you just looked at how quickly it was fetching all the data in literally milliseconds. And even even in the case where the data was a lot, it was still able to perform extremely well, and which goes to show that Helius is actually one of the best solutions for you if you are building a decentralized application on the Solana blockchain. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this video or found this useful. If you did, please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you have any questions related to Helius SDK or any of the DAS API topics or methods that we covered in this video, go ahead. You can always ask me in my Discord channel, which I will leave the description down below. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.